Okay, this is an interview at the Lexington Avenue Armory, New York City, August 6, 2002, with Alfred Farhood. The interviewer is Michael Russert. It's approximately 12:50 p.m. Sir, could you tell us your full name, your place of birth, and date of birth?
Yes, I'm Alfred Farhood. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, February 9, 1920.
And what was your pre-war, pre-military service education?
I went through high school. I did not have a college education.
Mm-hmm. When did you finish high school?
I finished in 1938.
Okay, and what occupations did you have before the war?
Well, I had a few menial jobs, which was pretty typical of the times. Mm-hmm. My first paycheck, I think, was $10 a week. Okay. And then I went into business with my father, who was in the linen importing business, a small family business, mm-hmm. embroidered linens, which we sold to department stores. And that's what I was doing when the war broke out. Okay,
could you tell us where you were and your reactions to the news about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was at a bowling alley at the time when the news came over the radio, and I was, as everyone else was, shocked about the whole situation and wondering what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So did you enlist or were you drafted?
I tried to enlist in the Air Corps, but my eyes did not allow me to try to become a pilot, mm-hmm. so I waited to be drafted.
And when were you drafted?
And I was drafted in February of 1942.
Okay. Could you tell us about your induction and then going to basic training where you were trained and so on?
Yeah, I was inducted here in, I think it was Whitehall Street it was, excuse me, sent to Camp Upton, and from there I was sent to Camp McClellan, Fort McClellan, mm-hmm. Alabama, and I had my basic training there, infantry basic training. That was for a 3-month period, and then from there I was sent up to Newfoundland, where I was put into an MP company up at Argentia, Newfoundland. And I was there for, I forget how long, but anyway, I applied for and was accepted for the infantry, OCS, and my class, I think, started at the beginning of January, and I was commissioned as second lieutenant on April 1, 1943.
Okay. And where were you sent from?
From there, I was sent to the 103rd Division at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. I was platoon leader in heavy weapons company, in charge of the mortar platoon, and I stayed with them for approximately 6 months, and I volunteered to go overseas. I went overseas toward the end of 1943, and I was assigned to the 182nd Infantry, which was part of the Americal division. I don't know if you're familiar with the Americal division. It was the only unnumbered division in the United States Army. Mm-hmm. And it was formed in New Caledonia of 3 separate regimental task forces, and that's where it got its name of Americal division. When I joined them, the 182nd Infantry was on the island of Fiji, after having been relieved of combat on Bogainville, mm-hmm. they having relieved the Marines at that time. And they were in a rest and training period, and that's when I joined them on Fiji Island. From Fiji Island, we went to Bogainville, and we fought the Japanese there. We had a tough time for a while. I don't know if you've ever heard of Hill 260.
Well, why don't you tell us about it?
Well, Hill 260 was an observation post. It was the highest point on the perimeter, or out in front of the perimeter. And we had use it as an observation post. There was a huge banyan tree on there, and we built a ladder, steps up to the top to build an observation post. And I frequently went up there as a mortar observer. And one night, not while I was on the post, on the base rather, the Japanese attacked. And they attacked in force on Hill 260. And I was sent up with other troops to 260. And I was the mortar observer during that period. And the battle on 260 lasted, I don't remember, 4, 5, 6 days, during which we were able to retain control of the island, of the hill, I should say. And we fought the Japanese off, and that stopped their advance for that period. Following that, our regiment made initial advances into further inland into Bogainville until our regiment and other regiments conquered the Japanese, and we had a little rest period on Bogainville for a short period.
Do you think you were prepared for the jungle combat that you...
As much as anybody else was ever prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Jungle warfare is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In what ways would you say it was different?
Well, it was. You didn't have an enemy that you could see in front of you. You didn't have an enemy line. We had our own perimeter, but we didn't know exactly where the Japanese were, and they were all over the island. And the Japanese, I'm sure you know, are very tenacious people. And they fought hard, and they would have positions in places you'd never expect them to have. On the top of a hill, for example, where you'd never expect to find an artillery piece, you'd find a Japanese weapon up there.
Okay, after you left Bougainville, where did you next go?
Well, we were training at that point for the invasion of the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And my regiment made the Beachhead Landing on the island of Leyte. And my particular battalion went into the island of Cebu, which was pretty heavily fortified by the Japanese. And we made a beachhead landing there. And we suffered some casualties, although they didn't fight tenaciously on the beach. They were more inland, but they had the minefields all over the beaches, and we suffered some casualties with that. And we made the march, combat, right through the island of Cebu, and it was a long battle, tough battle, because they occupied all the high terrain. But finally we conquered the Japanese on the island of Cebu. Yeah.
Where did you go after that?
And there we were in training for the invasion of Japan. Mm-hmm. And that was, as you know, that was something not to look forward to, actually, because we knew Japan would be heavily defended. And we were training, and our division was slated to go into Japan on the second wave. And we were conducting heavy-duty training there. And when the bomb was dropped in August of 45, we naturally were relieved to know we were not going to have to make a beachhead landing there. And we were just then preparing to occupy Japan because we knew the surrender was coming up. And our division was on the ocean. At the time, MacArthur on the Missouri accepted the surrender of Japan on, I think it was September 2nd. And I think we landed on Japan about on September 5th or 6th.
What was it like occupying Japan?
Well, it wasn't like anything we expected. expected there'd be some hostility there, but there was no hostility. We occupied an area north of Tokyo. It was a former Japanese camp, and we were on guard, but we had no incidents at all. It was interesting, though, because Japan is a very interesting country.
In what ways did you find it interesting?
Well, it's a beautiful country. The landscape is beautiful. The people were very polite, the ones we encountered. As I say, we had no hostility at all. And it was an interesting experience. And I was able to do a little traveling in Japan and see a few of the natural wonders and a few of the temples and more interesting areas. And we were there until the beginning of December, when we were ordered back to the States.
Okay, and what happened when you arrived back into the United States?
Excuse me. We were well greeted. It was a rough trip on the Pacific coming across, but beyond having a little seasickness, we made it okay. And we arrived in Seattle, and we were partially processed there. Mm-hmm. It was just great to be back in the States, and we were greeted warmly by anybody we met on the streets and whatnot. And from there, we were actually disbanded, and the people were sent to the post nearest their homes for release into the civilian world again.
What kind of reception did you have when you reached home?
Great reception. It was great. I mean, the family was great. Everybody greeted us greatly. People we didn't know were great. It was a wonderful feeling, as you can imagine. And we were lucky we got home before Christmas, which was a special treat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, at the Camp Kilmer, where we were released, and they asked us if we wished to remain in the reserve, and I accepted. So I had my commission, which at that time was a captain. I had a reserve commission in that grade. Following a few years in civilian life, the Korean War broke out. Mm-hmm. I think it was in June when the North Koreans invaded. And in October, I was recalled to active duty.
And where were you sent?
I was sent to Camp Kilmer, and there I was made a post S4, something for which I had no experience.
What does that mean?
The supply officer of the base. Mm-hmm. It's a staff position, the S4 being the supply officer. Mm-hmm. And so I learned the job, and I had a lot of help, naturally, and I'm trying to think exactly when. It was about 6 months later when I received orders to go to Korea. And we flew overseas at that time, rather than taking that in the transshipment. And we landed in Japan, and we were processed there, and I was assigned to the 24th Infantry Division in Korea, the 21st Infantry. 2 days after arriving there, I was on the front line with the Heavy Weapons Company, which I took over from the captain who was being relieved. I was in Korea for I guess 6 months, and we had a number of engagements in Korea, during which time, as I said, I commanded the Heavy Weapons Company again, and trying to think beyond that.
So you were there during the winter?
I was there during the second winter.
Okay. How well equipped was the American Army for winter in Korea?
When I got there, they were well equipped. I understand the first winter they were not that greatly equipped. We did not, thank God, have a severe winter. We had a relatively mild winter, the winter that I was there, because I know they had tremendous cold periods during the first winter in Korea, with the temperature going down to minus 35 degrees, and many casualties from the cold weather.
Okay, can you describe some of your actions while you were in Korea?
Well, let's say the 2 days after I arrived in Korea, I was on an outpost with my company, and luckily we did not have any problems there. But shortly after that, we made advances, and we were on the offensive. And luckily, I came through everything okay.
Mm-hmm. How would you say, I don't know if you can do this or not, the Koreans compared to the Japanese as a foe?
The Koreans?
If you could do that, or...
It's hard to judge. I think they were both pretty tricky. Mm-hmm. They had a lot of sneak at night attacks, and it's hard to pin down. Hard to locate them.
Now, you left before the Chinese intervened?
Actually, no. I think the Chinese intervened during that period. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was a tough period. But, we didn't have any. We made all the advances at that particular time, and I don't recall that my company was under any particular serious attack.
What do you think of the relief of MacArthur by Truman? What reaction did you have to that at the time?
Well,
especially you had fought in the Philippines too.
Yeah, MacArthur was a brilliant strategist. He also had a big ego. I think everybody knows that. And I think he did a great job in Korea. But he was hesitant to obey the commander-in-chief. Mm-hmm. And I honestly don't think that Truman had too much choice in the matter. I think he had to relieve him to protect his own position.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that you were wounded. Which conflict was that?
I received a knee mortar wound while we were on Hill 260.
Okay,
yeah. It wasn't a terrible wound. It wasn't an incapacitating wound. So I was treated, and I was back to duty.
Okay. How about your Bronze Star with an oak leaf cluster? Where did you receive that?
That was primarily for 260. Yeah. I was up there during the entire period, and I was the senior officer for a good part of the time up there, as well as conducting the mortar observation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you were in Korea 6 months, and what happened after you left Korea?
After I left Korea, I came back and I was discharged back into the reserve. Mm-hmm. And I remained in the reserve. I was attached to a replacement training company, which was actually they were understudies for Fort Dix, and we would have our summer training at Fort Dix, working with the cadre there, training the recruits. The idea being, if we were ever needed, we could take over a replacement training company at Fort Dix or any other camp, wherever we were needed. I remained in the reserve until I was age 60, which time was mandatory retirement. And, I was able to get the maximum time because I was promoted to colonel, and I automatically had 5 years service in that rank before I had to retire. So in all, I had from 1942 to 1960, I had active duty and reserve service. So I'm retired with, thank God, with full benefits of any officer who was in the service, and it's great. Especially since I live near Fort Hamilton, so we take full advantage of anything they have to offer.
Could you tell me how you felt your service affected your life?
I think my service was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I learned a lot about leadership. I learned a lot about getting along with people, understanding people. I also learned what a horrible thing war is and how stupid it is for people to be killing each other. And there's got to be a better way, but I think human beings will never learn the better way.
Did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
I did for a short period. I took some courses in Brazilian Portuguese. I went to Brazil on a business trip selling some Oriental rugs. I had a lot of relatives down there, and I made a trip shortly after the war down there, and then I made a follow-up trip to do some business down there. My business period down there was not too successful, so I was down there less than a year, and I came back to the States.
What kind of business did you work in? What did you do?
We still had the family embroidered linen business, and we imported embroidered linens from Madeira, down in the Madeira, hand embroidered, and we also imported goods from China. And I made one trip to China to oversee the embroidery works and whatnot. And it was shortly before the communists took over. And I beat them up by a few months before they got to southern China where I was.
And did this business continue?
We continued until the middle to late 50s. And the demand for fancy embroidered linens declined. So I had to give up the business. My father continued on a small basis. I had to leave because I wouldn't support both of us. And I went into first of all, the health insurance, disability health insurance. And I was in that for a year and a half, and then I expanded into life insurance. And I sold life insurance for a period. Then I was asked to accept a job in the home office in New York, a Manhattan Life Insurance Company in marketing. And I accepted that job, and I was with them till retirement age, and I retired from them.
When did you get married? Did you get married and when?
I got married after I returned from Korea. And I returned in February of 52, and I got married in December of 52.
Do you have any children?
I have a daughter, Susan, whom we adopted when she was 6 weeks old. She's now, she was born in 1957, so she's going to be, 45 in November. Which is the best thing we ever did. And she married a very fine young man, and we have 2 wonderful grandchildren. My granddaughter Christine will be going to Drew College in the fall, and Timothy will be in his 8th year in elementary school.
Do you belong to any veterans organizations?
I belong to the I don't belong to the VFW or any of those. I belong to the Reserve Officers Association, the Retired Officers Association, the Uniformed Services, which embraces officers and enlisted personnel.
Have you ever attended any reunions?
Just one. That's it. Yeah, way back. Not since then.
Have you stayed in contact with anyone you were in service?
I stayed in contact for a while. I was visited a few times by friends from Massachusetts. The 182nd Infantry was composed of people from Massachusetts. And I was visited in New York a few times by non-coms I was associated with, who came down to visit and spend a few days with us. I have not recently kept in touch with anybody.
Yeah, during your stay in the Pacific, you were on board ship, like for the invasion of Leyte?
I tell my brother-in-law who was in the Navy, I spent more time on ships than he did, because we were transported by the Navy from island to island.
Were you ever under attack by kamikazes?
No,
or
no.
any naval action? Or?
And never under any naval action, no. Well, they were all peaceful. The only thing, we did receive enemy fire when we made the beachhead on Cebu, but that was not terribly heavy. It was the minefields which were the worst part. And, all the action on Cebu was in the inland.
Okay, and speaking of being inland, did you run into any problems with like tropical diseases, malaria, dengue fever?
I was very fortunate. I did not have contact any of those.
How about your men?
I don't know if you're familiar with Adibrin. Adibrin was a tablet which was given to prevent malaria.
Right.
And most men were pretty conscientious about that. Once in a while we had somebody who tried to avoid it, and we had a couple of people contact malaria. But on the whole, we didn't have any big problem. We did have a fellow officer of mine who went overseas with me, did contract, in fact 2 of them, did contract some sort of tropical diseases. And one of them was sent back to the States. The other one continued through the war, but he died of some sort of a tropical disease about maybe 5 years after the war ended.
Did you ever get to see any USO shows during either World War II or Korea?
Yeah, we had Danny Thomas come over.
Oh,
and
this was World War II?
World War II, yeah. And Bob Hope came over while we were in the Philippines. And those were fun. You know, they were a great relief from the combat and from the training. I don't think we had any USO shows while I was in Korea.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for your interview. Is there anything else you would like to add? Or
no, I appreciate the chance to have this interview, and it's something I can, when I receive my copy, I can show my grandchildren.
Yes, sure. Yes. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Yes,
Thank you very much.